All right, welcome to the Football Outsiders live stream for Thursday, July 21st, 2022. I'm Aaron Schatz, Editor-in-Chief of Football Outsiders. We'd like to welcome everybody watching right now on YouTube Live and Twitch, listening afterwards on the Football Outsiders Podcast Network. It's time for another Football Outsiders Almanac 2022 preview, and we're going to talk today about the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. But before we get to that, we should hit briefly on the big news of the day, which is Kyler Murray's new 5-year, $230.5 million extension with the Arizona Cardinals, which is $500,000 more than what Deshaun Watson got in total money. Yay for $500,000. But it is actually a lot less in guaranteed money, which probably has something to do with how escrow works for the owners of the Cardinals. And I think Kyler Murray is not the best quarterback in the league, but I think he's definitely a guy you win because of. And when those guys come up for new contracts, you sign them to new contracts, even though it costs a ton of money. So I think it was a good decision by the Cardinals. And now that's going to lead to Lamar Jackson getting paid even more than this. And then eventually Joe Burrow getting paid even more than that. And I don't know, Cale, do you have thoughts about the Kyler Murray contract?
Yeah, I understand he might not be a top 10 guy right now, but considering kind of the carousel of quarterbacks that the Cardinals had going before this, Carson Palmer's don't fall into your lap every day. And I get there's also some issues with some of the second half struggles, but I also think that's a bit more systemic, and I think that probably falls a little bit more on Cliff's shoulders than Kyler's. But all in all, I like the deal. I think you kind of have to do it if you're in the Cardinals position, and the quarterback number just keeps going up and to the right. We'll see. We'll see what this next crop of Burrows and Herberts end up getting, because soon enough we're going to cross just a 50 mil threshold consistently, and it's money's going to balloon from there.
Yeah, Brian Knowles points out that the September-October Kyler Murray was fantastic. He really was. He was really good in the first part of last season and then fell off. Part of that is this whole weird Cardinals thing where they fall off in the second half of every season. Part of that was DeAndre Hopkins getting injured. You won't have DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 games this year, which is why our projections on him are down a bit. But, I think he's a guy you've got to pay. And so they paid him. I don't know. It's not a team you cover, Greg, so I don't know if you have any particular thoughts about Kyler Murray here.
Well, I do. A couple of things. I think you guys are right. I think that they've invested a lot in him, and they've gone down this road, including as soon as, they just jettisoned Rosen after 1 year and went with Murray and basically changed head coaches. So they're all in on him. So they had to pay him. Kyler Murray, I think, is he's a fantastic talent. But my big issue with Murray is that he fades. When you get players his size over the course of now 17 games, and the amount that he does inside the pocket, outside the pocket, he wears down. I don't think it's just a Cardinals thing. Even though part of it's roster construction where they've had some older players and they haven't gotten any younger at the offensive skill position, players in recent years. And so that's always an issue, for them. But I think part of it is Murray. It's hard for him. Yeah, he might have started just about every game, I think, last year, but he wasn't healthy the second half of the season. Shoulder
he missed
stuff.
3 injury. He missed 3 with injury, and then he was a little injured when he came back.
Yeah, and when he came back, he wasn't the same, and that's what he's going to have to prove that he can overcome. He's going to have to play smarter every single year. Cliff's going to have to do a better job designing the offense around him to keep him healthy, to make sure he makes 17 starts, because until that happens, the Cardinals are going to underachieve. But I do think that they had to pay him. I do think it's a little bit more digestible that it's an extension. So it's really, 7 years and so many odd million to average, averages out where it's not obscene. So I think all those things sort of fold into this is something they had to do. And, we'll see if he's worth it.
And we know where the cap is going. This contract is 2024 to 2028, and the cap is going to be up in 2024 to 2028. So, by the time we do Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, this is not going to look ridiculous. This is going to completely make sense. But now they have to solve the second half thing, which is could be partly Murray's size, could be partly age of players. Definitely is partly Cliff Kingsbury because he had the same problem at Texas Tech that he's had with the Cardinals. And it's just a strange pattern that seems to take place every year. Question of the day. We're going to start by talking about the New England Patriots. And the question of the day for the audience is whether going to the Patriots can resuscitate DeVante Parker's career and make him a top NFL wide receiver again. And I'm going to start by posing that question to you guys. What do you think about DeVante Parker on the Patriots? And does he become like a fantasy force again? Is he going to be a huge part of their offense? Or is he going to be more just like one guy among a number of guys?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll start, Cale. But, I think that really the ultimate question with Parker is, can he stay on the field? I mean, if he can't, and that's been a humongous problem for him, it's why the Dolphins have been, trying to replace him for 2 years and made wholesale changes and invested a lot. That's the issue with him. And, there are a lot of questions about that, about whether he can hold up. I think if he's healthy and on the field, I think he's the type of receiver that Mac Jones would really like. He contested catches, which you guys note in your in your chapter on the Patriots, really good for the amount that he's played. Big body. Mac's the type of guy who, you give him a few angles, and it's something he's never really had because N'Keal Harry didn't work out. But, he's able to, with work in practice with Parker, he's going to be able to throw a lot of back shoulders up in the air. Mac's going to know where to target, DeVante Parker. And I think they are going to make a good duo. It's just a question of, can he answer the bell week in and week out? And, that's a big question with him.
Yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I think just being able to stay on the field is paramount to success for Parker, just because it seems like there's so many mouths to feed in New England. I think at one point in the book, I described the entire wide receiver cola as sort of a proverbial wide receiver Voltron, where they all kind of amass to something bigger than the sum of their parts because they can all do one thing really well. Jacoby Myers did break out as a vertical threat last year, but I think he really thrives best as sort of a intermediate short passing game over the middle guy. Nelson Aguilar is a vertical threat. Kendrick Bourne is sort of a do-it-all gadget guy. And like we pointed out, Parker kind of fits right into that contested catch role. And I think he can have the potential to, really link up with Mac Jones. But, Jones already developed a really strong rapport with Meyer, just continually going back to him in crucial situations on third down. We've also got 2 additional tight ends. Hunter Henry, he seemed to really like him Jones seemed to really like him in the red zone. They're still working on integrating Jonnu Smith into the mix, and then you bring in passing backs. All of a sudden, you can rattle off, 10 guys that can end up notching, 20, 30 catches in this offense, depending on how much New England decides to spread the ball around. I also think offense in general is just kind of a big question mark because we still really don't know what they're running. We don't even know who's calling plays. We've heard some rumblings of new systems, new terminologies from Kendrick Bourne. It'll just be interesting. I'm very optimistic. I think he can have a resurgence. And I do agree, though, it all just kind of comes down to, can he stay on the field to even begin to make that impact in the first place?
Yeah, I feel like the chapter really goes into like a big question on each side of the ball for the Patriots. And on the offensive side, it really is like, who's the coordinator and is it the same offense that they ran last year? Are they doing different things? Like, who's calling the plays? There's just a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's probably the biggest question is what the heck are they going to look like on offense? And if they are changing systems, did they just ruin, a pretty decent rookie season for Mac Jones? And are they going to have to reteach him? Josh McDaniels leaving and not having an heir apparent, sort of an understudy like, we've seen in Buffalo. Brian Daboll leaves, but then you have Ken Dorsey there waiting in the wings. You have Joe Brady, there to tutor Josh Allen. I mean, it's about as good as a situation you can have. And then you look at the Patriots, and they're going with Joe Judge as a quarterback's coach, who was If you ask anybody around the building, he was a disaster when he was a receivers coach, in addition to special teams coordinator, his final season in New England. And, Matt Patricia, who I think Matt would do fine just with the offensive line. He played that in college. He's coached that a little bit in the pros. He has Billy Yates assisting him. I think that's fine. But what else is going to be on his plate? And is Belichick going to be sort of, calling the plays? It's a mess. Really the Patriots, you don't know how good they can be until we get some answers on the offensive side of the ball. And I don't know when we're going to get those answers. I think it's going to be an evolving thing that we see over the course of the season. And that's even before you get into, well, if Belichick's attention is now more on offense, what happens with the defense that has underachieved the last few years with Steve Belichick and Gerard Mayo? So there's a lot of questions about what's going on in New England, and it starts with what's going on with the offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that really scares me most is just Judge and Patricia. We've already heard a lot about, the amount of time that Belichick would spend with Brady working on offense in his heyday. We've heard stories of that already. The things that just keep, scratching in the back of my mind are, John Mara walking up to a podium last year saying we did about just the worst possible job developing Daniel Jones. We did about as poor of a job as you could have done. And then you look back to stories of Patricia in his first year in Detroit, where veterans are popping champagne in the locker room that were impending free agency just because they knew they don't have to come back to Detroit anymore and run stairs at Matt Patricia. Like, their coaching track records, at least since leaving New England, have been, piss poor. It's been, horror story after horror story with a lot of these guys. How much saving grace can Belichick really offer to these guys is one thing, but I don't know. I think one of the benefits of having Mac Jones as the guy that you've bet on is just the cerebral part of this game. The fact that he had, that was the biggest thing that was touted out of college, just the ability to kind of understand and run an offense and implement it on his own. I think that really shows, a veteran mind in a very, young quarterback. And I think that'll at least help smooth some things over. And I think also him, guy looks like he's in great shape. It's the classic offseason story of shape of his life, but it's a far cry from the pudgy, cigar pictures of him winning the national championship. I'm optimistic about him. It's the questions about the infrastructure surrounding him are the biggest issues. But I think at least, Jones on his own, plus at least having depth and a variety in the skill position group, I think is going to smooth some things over. And also, I know there's been 2 losses on the offensive line, but I still think they're probably going to be, a top half of the league, if not a top 10 unit still. It's still a very strong line. It's got everything going for him, but the system itself is, maybe we'll start to see it unfold in training camp. Maybe we won't until preseason. But that's, that really predicates just how well New England's going to do the rest of the year. And I think the variance on it is pretty wide.
Defensively, I think there's a lot of questions also. We really have their defense declining in large, the loss of J.C. Jackson is really huge. And I think the first is cornerbacks, who are going to be the top cornerbacks for this team? And the second is the interesting sort of change at linebacker, where the veterans that have been there a long time are gone. And you write about this a lot in the chapter. They're sort of going with smaller, faster guys, bringing in Mac Wilson, and then getting guys back from injury like Raekwon McMillan, who missed last year, and Cameron McGrone, and there's no more Dante Hightower, and there's no more Jamie Collins. But those guys definitely seem to be falling off last year.
I mean, Dante Hightower was still very strong in the run game. It's a much more one-dimensional player than he once was, but, it helped out New England a lot in the run game and just the front seven in general. But New England's really leaning a lot on these young guys now. Jalen Mills and Terrence Mitchell will, do their best in the secondary along with Malcolm Butler, but heard a decent amount of rumblings about Jack Jones being pretty heavily relied on in the New England secondary. You still have Devin McCourty kind of orchestrating things back there. Adrian Phillips also played fantastically last year, at least very strong. The quarterbacks are going to be a very weak link, but they started to transition to a little bit more zone. started to play a little bit more nickel, like and dime plus. They're starting to just use the all-encompassing aspect of, D-backs in general, not just relying on the singular cornerback in J.C. Jackson. But, I mean, Jackson was fantastic. It's going to be really tough to replace his just singular presence and ability to kind of match up one-on-one with the best receiver on any single team. I think it's going to be an issue definitely against Buffalo. Top of the crop in the AFC East. Those will be tough two matchups there. With the front seven, again, it's more of the same. Kyle Van Noy, losing him off the edge. Now you're really relying on Josh Uche to perform alongside Matthew Judon. You're really calling on Jawan Bentley, who did actually step up in the COVID season when Dante Hightower sat out for the year. Didn't play as great, but I also think bringing Hightower and Jamie Collins back into the fold and allowing Bentley to take a back seat, I think a year of buffer in between a leadership role and a secondary role, now back into a leadership role. I hope that those 2 years have, maybe given him a little bit more wisdom at the position and just allowed him to better develop into a leader in that front seven. They're placing a lot of faith in him to really spearhead that defense now. If the questions on the offensive side of the ball are all scheme issues, now on the defense, it's all personnel and asking a lot of these young guys to come in and step up.
What are you thinking about the young guys, Greg? Let's start with the young cornerbacks, Jack Jones and Marcus Jones. Are we actually going to see a good amount of these guys?
Well, I think based off of off-season practices, we'll see a lot of Jack Jones. He was out there a lot. I was surprised that Terrence Mitchell was almost a day one starter, a journeyman guy in Houston. Jalen Mills will be out there. And I think, Jonathan Jones is coming back from injury. I think he's always been one of the top slot cornerbacks, which is one of the toughest jobs in football. I think it'll be Jack Jones versus Terrence Mitchell versus Malcolm Butler. As far as the, one of the top cornerback roles. I don't think they obviously don't have a number one. I think Jack has the most upside. Marcus Jones, I don't know, he's been battling an injury, wasn't out there much in OTAs. And I agree with Greg Cosell, who I've, talked to after the draft, and he sees him more as a honey badger type guy. I think he's more of a successor in the secondary, which they're already loaded with safety. So I don't know where he plays outside of, getting into dime and doing things with personnel. Now that gets you into, can they even get to that? And that's been a problem for that defense the last couple of years, where ever since Vince Wilfork went to Houston, they've been weak in the middle and they can't stop the run well enough. Devon Godchow, they put a lot of money into him. I don't think he was all that good last year. They didn't do it. They didn't even draft a nose tackle this year to give them an option. So it's all on Godchow again to do a better job. And I think you're right to single out Uche. I think, you look at pass rush and coverage. If your coverage is a little bit weak, you can deal with that if your pass rush is better. And a guy like Chase Winovich never worked out. They never really, Judon really didn't have a running mate. I think they're pegging Josh Uche for that role. Steve Belichick and Bill Belichick both called him one of the biggest puzzle pieces in this defense in the offseason. And I think they're right. I mean, I do think they have some upside. They gotta let some of these kids play. And that's been one of my main criticisms, especially last year. And, even going back a couple years, the Cam Newton year. Just let the kids play so you can see what they're capable of. I do think Uche's capable of more. It's just they don't like to trust youngsters very much. But now I think they've gotten into a situation where they have no choice. They have to, especially with the cap situation and their lack of good drafting and things like that. Now they have to play the kids, and I think Uche's the guy who could stand up and do a good job for them.
Greg, if I can ask, what are your thoughts on Christian Barmore then? Because he was really fantastic as an interior pass rusher, 8th in the league among interior defensive linemen and pressures. How do you think do you think they start to fold him more into the run game coverage? Do you think they start to use him more on 3 downs? How do you think they start to implement him more in rotation with Godchow?
Yeah, it's a good question, Cale, and you're absolutely right. He was sensational as a rookie. One of the best interior lineman rookie seasons any Patriot has ever had. I mean, you go back to even when Vince Wilfork was I think a first round pick in the lower half of the first round. He didn't play a whole lot as a rookie. Of course, they were pretty good back then, but I think, they tried him a little bit to give him some first and second down roles last year. He didn't do a great job with it. I think that's going to be one of the things that I watch a lot in training camp and in the preseason. I think they would like to see him add that to his repertoire and be able to, perhaps, maybe against some lighter offensive lines that he plays all three downs. I think that'll be a work in progress, and he's going to need to prove himself. I think they'd like to give him the opportunity, but I still think for now, I think they like just, his sub rusher role. It was Judon in pressures, and then Barmore was next, and then a humongous drop off after that. So they need all of that stuff and more if they're going to be better on defense this year.
Another young guy to add to the list of guys who need to step up.
Yeah, but one that I think I have a little bit more faith in. Like, I think a lot of people are believers in Barmore as opposed to Uche, or knowing what you're going to get out of Jack Jones as a rookie, or Mac Wilson coming over from Cleveland. I think Barmore leads the young guys.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yep.
So our overall projections for the Patriots are just a little bit above 500. So we definitely have them declining on both offense and defense. They were really good in our numbers last year, in part because they had a couple of very fluky, gigantic wins over Cleveland and Tennessee. Well, I mean, over Jacksonville too, but the Jacksonville one gets opponent adjusted, but it was colossal. And then the Cleveland and Tennessee wins were just huge. And then the rest of the time they were, kind of good, but obviously had a little bit of trouble in Buffalo when the weather didn't participate for them. So they end up coming out a little bit above average, making the playoffs in 45% of the simulations. The special teams should be a help because it should bounce back from last year. That's where Marcus Jones, if he's healthy, plays a role because he's a really good return man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the nugget I had on Jones was he had a kick return, punt return, pick six, and receiving touchdown in college. I mean, if you're talking about do-it-all guys, Marcus Jones is up there.
Yeah, I had them when I went through their schedule when it came out. I had them at 9 and 8. So similar to you guys, and I think you're right about last year. I mean, I remember after the Tennessee game, I wrote a column that said basically I have more questions than answers after this game, and I just wanted to. My biggest concern about the team, and it came to fruition with Buffalo. When they go up against a team with a good quarterback and can spread the Patriots out with multiple weapons, how are they going to hold up? And they didn't do that very well down the stretch. And, do I think they have a chance to be a little bit better this year? Yeah, I do. I don't hate their pieces in the secondary as much as some people. I have probably more concerns about the offensive line than a lot of people. Relying on Trent Brown to stay healthy and play left tackle is a big risk. Isaiah Wynn, is he around? Is he going to play right tackle? How's he going to do? Cole Strange, was he overdrafted? Is he really ready to be a good starter at left guard as a rookie? And Mike Owenu, look, the kid's had his moments, but let's not ignore the fact that they tried him at guard last year and he lost his job to Ted Karras. And so, there are a lot of questions on that offensive line, and they're going to need that to be a lot better, to set up Mac Jones to have the ability to have success. So, I do like some of what they're doing, and I have some optimism, but man, a lot of things need to go right for this team.
Yeah. I think they're more likely they're going to be in the hunt for the 6th and 7th seeds till the end. But I mean, they're not, I realize that our projections are all closer to 500 than usual this year, but I don't feel like this team can really challenge Buffalo. Not unless there's a scat of injuries for the Bills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the median's pretty high, but they're really missing just those wide receiver one on offense, a guy who could really break plays off in the run game, a top cornerback. The pieces you think about when you think of an upper echelon team that are completely absent from this Patriots roster, and I think it's really I think New England's just kind of banking on, with Belichick, this team can be greater than the sum of its parts. And you're banking a lot on scheme. There's enough question marks there already.
And a 70-year-old coach.
Yeah, that too.
Greg Bedard's site, for those who want to follow him more, is bostonsportsjournal.com. It's everything about Boston sports, all kinds of really in-depth coverage, not just all the Patriots coverage that you want, but Red Sox, Celtics, Bruins. Check out his site, please, bostonsportsjournal.com. Greg, thank you so much for joining us to talk about the Patriots. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Aaron, I've been a loyal reader of Football Outsiders for 2 decades now, I think, since I think I was at the Palm Beach Post and covering the Dolphins. So I always look for, you're the one book and the one season preview that I make sure to devour as soon as I get it. So thanks for all the work you guys do.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the endorsement.
All right, Cale and I are going to move on now and talk about the other team for today, the other team that Cale covered in the book, and that is the New York Jets. The Jets are not as good as the other teams in the AFC East. They could be if everything goes right for them. I feel like almost every unit on the Jets, you're like, well, there's potential here. It could go right, and you like the coaching staff, but then when you talk about the overall New York Jets projection, it's near the bottom of the league.
Yeah, because I think the whole aspect of that is just you got there's a lot of optimism, and I think there's some kind of sicko eternal optimism with Jets fans. There's always some kind of inkling that this is the year, but you got to lean back on precedent, which is why it's, why they're so far back in our rankings. But when you just look at it on paper, especially with the young talent that they've brought in, you're like, maybe this can work. I don't know. I don't know. Where do you want to start? Because I think there's the draft class that they just had and the free agent talent that they brought in this year, coupled with what they already had existing on the roster, there's a lot of different ways to go with this. I think the offense is really interesting. I'm really excited to look into the secondary more as training camp goes on. Where do you want to start?
I mean, first of all, I'm going to invite readers and listeners and watchers. If you're watching us live right now on YouTube or Twitch, please bring on your questions about either the Patriots or the Jets. You can tell us what you want to talk about with this team, but it's interesting because you think about telling the story of a team turning it around. I feel like the story of the Jets are a surprise playoff team is a much easier story to tell than the Atlanta Falcons are a surprise playoff team, or even the New York Giants are a surprise playoff team. And I think you start with the quarterback because it feels like they're strong receivers. It feels like the offensive line is a little underrated. You've got our number one running back prospect in Breece Hall and a talented backup in Michael Carter. A lot of it comes down to just, can Zach Wilson take a massive step forward? Because he was bad last year.
It was really rough to see, but I think the reason that the Jets are more believable as a playoff hopeful than the teams you mentioned is just because of how high the upside is for Zach Wilson. And we start the biggest thing that stuck out to me is I'm not as big of a guy who follows college. So I was only really kind of cursory following the Jets or the prospects coming into the season. I do minor film labs here and there. But the highlight packages you see from Zach Wilson are 60-yard bombs, throws on the run, evasions of pressure, just mind-blowing, plays that evoke Mahomes and modern Josh Allen, or later in his career, Josh Allen. What you see at the beginning of the year is him just trying to do that over and over and over and over again to no avail. He doesn't he didn't know when to throw it away. He didn't know when to check down. It's constantly extending plays. The biggest eye-opening one for me was just that Patriots game, that first Patriots game in week 2. Got big thunder here. The 4 straight interceptions for Wilson in that game, maybe 5, but just plays where he's trying to save things out of structure, throw it up, and Devin McCourty or J.C. Jackson are just sitting right under it. And there's a couple of the later ones, there's not a Jets receiver within 3-4 yards of it. It's just Zach Wilson trying to resurrect plays. the Mike White game is where you really start to see like, oh, this is an offense that Mike White is running exclusively on checkdowns, and you're able to beat the Bengals. Then you see Bill sitting lower on routes, Mike White unable to do anything about that, nothing underneath. Zach Wilson really, I think, kind of learned from that. He started to improve it in the back half of the year, but by then, he's thrown to Braxton Berrios as his lead receiver. You can't do that.
Way better weapons for this year with Garrett Wilson there.
Absolutely.
And Corey Davis healthier, and Elijah Moore with another year of experience.
Garrett Wilson kind of throws a win-win across the board for the Jets. Wilson's able to play inside and out, so if you want to kick more to the slot where he played more in college, you can. Wilson can also play slot and bump more to the outside. If Corey Davis is actually playing up to his contract, then Wilson, acts as sort of a great third guy potentially, or a great first guy, depending on how you order it. But if Davis can't get up to snuff, then Wilson kind of bumps him down the depth chart, and now Corey Davis can play the role of a great third receiver. It's the versatility that he's able to provide is really impressive. I think it opens up a lot. It also makes me a lot more optimistic about Berrios. Sort of the tail end comeback for him. He's done it 2 years in a row now where he stepped up for players in injury. And letting Jamison Crowder walk, I think they at least have some kind of faith in him.
Yeah. I want to get to the defense just because Thor Dane asked how on earth the Jets jumped to a top 10 defensive projection. And I will fully admit that when I did our projections, I think I emailed everyone and was like, by the way, here's one of the weird ones. The Jets had one of the worst defenses in the league last year. There's two stats in particular that the defensive projection system really sees as strongly regressing to the mean. And if I remember correctly, the Jets were really bad in both of them last year. And that is defense against short yardage runs and takeaway per drive on defense. And then you add to that all the talent that they've added on defense. First of all, Sauce Gardner and Jermaine Johnson, the 2 first-round picks. And then getting Carl Lawson back from injury that cost him all of last year. And LaMarcus Joyner back from injury that cost him all of last year. And DJ Reed and Jordan Whitehead. This is a lot of new and healthier and then younger. There's all kinds of interesting talent now in the defense that wasn't there last year. And this doesn't go into the projection system, but I think anecdotally, we know that Saleh ran a good defense in San Francisco. I think, hey, Robert Saleh turns this defense around in his second year is a story you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, Brian told it in the 2021 Almanac chapter when he was writing up the Jets. Saleh didn't start out fantastically in San Francisco when he was a defensive coordinator. I've got a squall going on outside. I'm sorry. That 49ers secondary ranked bottom 10 in the league the first 2 years before kind of introducing the cover 2 system into San Francisco. And then they jump up to a top 10 unit. I also think a lot of the secondary issues end up coming from just how young they were. I dropped the Jets started over 6,000 snaps from rookies, second most in the league. A lot of that outside of Zach Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker, most of the rest of those came from the secondary and guys like Michael Carter, the cornerback, Ashton Davis, the safety, I believe, as well. Really relying on Bryce Hall to play as a second-year corner. They had, I think 4 of the top 6 snap getters for the Jets were either first or second-year players. And now you're relying on a guy like Sauce Gardner coming out as a rookie, but he also has a proven track record. Everyone else for the Jets were day 3 young picks. This is now a lead guy who can really come in. He picked number 1 on his jersey for a reason. He's, kind of Babe Ruth calling his shot there.
I believe he is the straw that stirs the drink.
Exactly. He's really got the talent to be kind of a lead guy. And I'm pretty excited about DJ Reed and even Jordan Whitehead, just the veteran presence that they're able to bring in. Whitehead playing alongside LaMarcus Joyner, I think is going to be a lot stronger of a safety group going forward. I think DJ Reed, who is a solid veteran from his early days, is just going to be able to mesh in really well and, help out these guys. But those two, Reed and Gardner, immediately jump to the top two of the depth chart. And then everyone else that was a starter last year falls below. So now they go from a really young, really weak team to a surprisingly deep
right
quarterback unit.
I think Thordain has a point where he says that he's flashing back to the Patriots game where they just abused the Jets' defensive line by running the ball. All the improvements we're talking about here, other than just like regression to the mean on defense against short yardage, the player improvements are all pass guys, right? I mean, I guess Jordan Whitehead is a strong safety, so maybe he's a little bit of a run guy, but really he's a pass guy. DJ Reed, pass guy. Sauce Gardner, pass guy. Jermaine Johnson and Carl Lawson, pass rush. So, yeah, their run defense is still going to be a problem. I think where we see the improvement significantly is in the pass defense.
Oh, and that's where they needed by far the most improvement, finishing dead last in defensive pass DVOA. But I like the strengths of, that front four of John Franklin Myers, Quinnen Williams, Sheldon Rankins, Carl
It should
Lawson.
be better than it was last year. Those players should be better than they were last year. Quinnen Williams is good. It should be better than they were last year. I think did our storm just take out Cale? All right, well, we wait to see if Cale comes back. I'll just respond to Rivka Board about it's funny that we're so much higher on the Jets defense because the offense has so much more talent. I think that when you look at the raw talent, it does seem like the offense should have more talent, but so much is about the quarterback. And I think that our systems don't see a likely gigantic improvement from Wilson. Like, is the possibility there? Yes. Is it likely? No. And so that's why our offensive projection is so much lower than what looks like, I'll admit, like a weird looking high defensive projection. So I don't know if we're going to get Cale back. So I think I'm actually going to sign off for today from talking about the Jets. And thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching the show. If you're watching live on YouTube or on Twitch, thank you all for listening afterwards on the Football Outsiders Podcast Network. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show. Football Outsiders, read the site. Football lives here. Football Outsiders Almanac 2022 out now. If you don't have a copy, get yourself a copy. You get a free copy with an FO Plus subscription, and those subscriptions are 20% off until the end of the month. Hey, there's Cale, just in time for me to sign off. Do you have any other words you'd like to say about the I sign off? I think the storms hit you down.
It just knocked out my power for a second, knocked out my internet. The last thing I gotta say about Jets, it really Wilson that if they can maximize on his ceiling, allowing like that floor to rise, just being able to hit those checkdowns, like attracting, I think it makes a world of difference for this offense. Side note, we didn't even mention the running game. The running backs, Breece Hall, Michael Carter, Ty Johnson was top 10 among running backs. They now bring back a pretty versatile group. With Breece Hall, our top guy coming out of the draft. I don't think success for this Jets more than 6 wins, 7 wins, but kind of upside before heads start to roll there. Because they have, on paper, it's still a young team, but, it's at least like a competent, which they haven't always been able to say.
Yeah. Nick Foster says in the comments, it's not saying it's going to happen, but they do have every indicator of a bad team that makes a massive jump. And I would agree with that. There are a lot of indicators here. And by the way, I would include the quarterback in that, because while we don't think he's very good based on his rookie season and the fact that he didn't play a very hard schedule in college, the fact is you're talking about a number 2 overall pick here. The potential is still good. So the story you can tell about the Jets turning it around like I said, it's an easier story to tell than a lot of the other teams at the bottom of our projections. Okay, that does it for the show. Football Outsiders Almanac 2022 preview. Join us next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. I believe that next Tuesday we are doing the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears with Derek Klassen and our special guest Aaron Nagler from Cheesehead TV. And then next Thursday, we'll be doing the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions with Derek and Matthew Collar from Purple something. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the name of Matthew's website, but it's a Vikings website, and he'll be covering the Vikings with us. Okay, that does it for today's show. For Cale and his storm in New York, thank you all so much for watching and listening. We'll be back next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern from Football Outsiders. I'm Aaron Schatz.